Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome from all over the world today. We are very, very honored to be hosting you from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia for the Task Force 6 T20 Summit webinar. I would like to start by the big round of thank yous. This year has been quite the journey for many of us. The way we started out certainly isn't where we are today. All the plans that we had didn't necessarily come to the fruition we expected them to, but in many, many ways, we've surpassed what we thought was going to happen. And we learned a lot along the way. So I would like to start by thanking Dr. Fahad and the Secretariat here for the T20, the whole team. There are so many people on this team that deserve our gratitude, and a lot of people behind the scenes that made this all come together in such a professional and impactful way. And I thank each and every one of them for all of their support, for their availability around the clock, and for ensuring that everything gets done on time and in the most impactful way. I would like to extend a special thank you for the teams at CAPSARC and King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. They have done such a marvelous job at supporting us as the co-chairs and the lead co-chairs to be able to do the job that we've done. Again, a special thank you to all of my co-chairs. I have had the honor and the privilege of working with some amazing people. Paul Granger, Peter Morgan, Alejandra Cardini, Victor Pineda, Dennis Gurlich. It has been an honor and a pleasure to serve with you. I have learned so much from everyone on our team, and your support has been bar none. I'm so appreciative. I would like to send a special thank you to Kamil Ahmed, who's here with me, our coordinator, and you'll be hearing more from him today, and the many multitude of other people. Special thank you, Dr. Sandra Willis, Ivan with Dr. Alejandra. There have been many, many requests along our journey, and we have adapted along the way, and they have been absolutely invaluable. In addition, a huge thank you to all of our authors. I have to preface, this year, again, has been unlike any other year many of us had ever planned for. We have co-authors who have been faced with illness themselves, contracted COVID and other illnesses. Family members have been ill. We have co-authors who have survived explosions in their cities and lost their homes. We have co-authors who have been pushing through and trying to survive the fires in the United States currently. We have co-authors who have moved and co-chairs who have moved around maybe 7 or 8 times within the past 6 months. And yet every single author, every single partner, every single person who has worked with us has not missed a deadline. They haven't missed a commitment. They have never said no to a request. And to me, that speaks to the resilience, commitment, and the profound commitment and value that they bring to the table. This is, for me, human beings at their best, giving everything that they have, no matter what's going on in their lives. So a profound thank you to everyone who ran the whole marathon with us. I also would like to thank our network. As everybody knows, within the T20, there are a network of think tanks, a network of partners, a network of individual researchers who come together to make sure that we get the value and the best benefits that we can to represent the whole world in the research that we provide. Task Force 6 started out with over 60 proposals for our policy briefs. We had over 165 researchers from 63 different think tanks around the world, multiple countries involved. We ended up publishing 12 of those policy briefs, and we are very proud of that work. Even for those that haven't been published, that does not mean that those topics were any less relevant. But our final policy briefs also span the gamut of a number of topics. I've always said from the beginning of T6, it's an interesting task force. We have quite a diverse area of topics, everything from cybersecurity to fintech, to education, to employment, to economic impacts, to the fourth industrial revolution, etc. The one string that holds this all together is issues around the digital age and technology. And certainly with COVID, it has highlighted our topic in a way that none of us could have planned for. While many of the topics that were being addressed were relevant, they were important, they became indispensable and platforms that were seeing the biggest changes ever faced in the history of many of these topics, whether it was education, employment, or other areas. So it has been an interesting year. And these main areas are published on our website. You can download the policy briefs, peruse them, engage with them, and please do engage with them. It is important for us to get feedback and hear from everybody and get that discourse and that conversation going around the policy briefs and the topics. They matter to each and every individual listening today and living in society. The beauty of the topics that we're talking about today is it is not something that is reserved for politicians, for governments, or for researchers. Many of the topics that you're going to hear and many of our expert panel that will be talking today are talking about topics that touch each and every one of us, whether we're children, whether we're persons with disabilities, whether we're women, whether we're men, whether we're older, whether we're younger, whether we're parents today, learning to be teachers, trying to teach our children, keeping them safe. You'll hear many, many, many issues that we have been faced with, and you may not hear all of them here today, but they certainly do exist. My call to action for everybody listening and joining us today is this is not just about policies. This is about the issues that impact you, as I said, as an individual. What is your role? What is the role that you take in helping drive this discourse and contributing to the voices that come together that help shape policy? Your voice matters, your thought matters. So we're looking forward to hearing them. I'm going to just end here by just sharing 3 main lessons learned that we learned throughout our process in terms of administering this task force. 1, agility and flexibility. Researchers and policy development tend to take time. We like to make sure we have everything done correctly and we have isolated all the factors and we've looked at things, we've looked at the risks, etc. If we've learned anything this year, we have to move faster. In situations like we're in, policy can be determined overnight. We have to be very aware of what we're saying and how we're doing things and how that has a short and long-term impact. So agility, flexibility, but being very mindful and very aware is critical. Second, very important lesson learned is collaboration. And again, this was one of the most humbling and biggest takeaways for me on a personal level. I have met some of the most inspirational colleagues during the past 8 to 9 months, and I'm very humbled to have met everyone. In our role in my role as the lead co-chair, I've also had the privilege of working with different engagement groups, as well as different topical groups that provide support to the G20. It never ceases to amaze me how much crossover there are in all of these issues that we all address. And it is critical to reach out and be coordinating with all of the other groups to ensure that these very important topics that we're working on are not done in silos, that we have the crossover, that we're making the best of the best brains that we have that are available to us across all of these groups. So collaboration is immensely important. And I'm so proud to say that during this pandemic, we have seen it in droves, open arms, and it's been very humbling to see. My final lesson learned was inclusion. I come from a background of diversity and inclusion, and I realize that that term is used very loosely. Many people talk about diversity as being male and female. And again, I think whether it's through our own work or through what we've seen this year, diversity and inclusion is such a bigger basket of individuals. It really encompasses persons with disabilities, the elderly, the youth, women, men, migrant populations. There's so many colors of individuals in the world. And it's very important to make sure when we have the responsibility of developing policies, that we're clear about who we're including in those policies and who we may be excluding. It's very important, and it was a lesson learned during this time, to be very aware of when big changes happen. And again, unlike any time in history, we're evaluating our educational systems, our employment systems. It's very important for us to be sure that when we have this opportunity to rebuild in a new way and to come back better, let's do it really consciously and make sure that we're including everyone that needs to be included so that we truly leave no one behind. So inclusion was our third big lesson. So having said that, it is with great honor that I would like to move on and introduce our opening keynote speech. Our opening keynote speech is being given by our partners today from FGV, who are co-sponsoring this task force presentation. I would like to introduce Carlos Ivan Simonson. Carlos Ivan Simonson has been president of the GVF since 2000. Previously, he served as FGV Vice President, General Director of its Graduate School of Economics, and Director of FGV Business, having begun his work at the foundation as a professor in the EPGE. A member of the National Academy of Engineering, he was awarded Brazil's Grand Cross of the National Order of Scientific Merit, as well as several military awards. He studied civil engineering at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and received a PhD in economics from Princeton University, where he was a Fulbright scholar. Dr. Simonson.
It's a pleasure to be here today. First, I want to say hello to everybody. And I was enchanted by your introductory speech. And just let me say to you that I agree completely with the fight for diversity. Not only for admitting diversity as a fact that we not only we have to live with, but also that we have to enjoy, which is a very different thing. But sometimes also as a fact that we have to understand is evolving a long time. For instance, we are in the midst of a huge economic shock caused by confinement, which is actually the only weapon that we have up to today, only effective weapon that we have up to today for fighting the COVID-19. This shock covers another, more enduring, and I'm afraid to say, I think more terrible shock in the world economy, which is people of middle level will become useless. Why is that so? And that is so because we are being alphabetized in these new means of communication as we are using now, Zoom, Teams, WebEx, Google Meet, and so forth. And those things come sometimes with an ecosystem of softwares and practices that are changing profoundly, are starting to change profoundly processes around the world. Here at my institution, I see that every day. And what we used to do with 100 people, we'll be able to do in the future with maybe 70 people. So who are those that are going to lose their jobs? Those are not the very poor. The very poor lost their jobs at the beginning of confinement. And due to stimulus, they have recovered some means of survival, for now at least. But in the medium run, people that are middle class, and that I could simplify by saying that the productivity of their labor, the marginal productivity of their labor is in the middle, they are going to lose their jobs. They are becoming useless in terms of the functioning of firms. Therefore, we are going to have an increase in structural unemployment. And that is going to affect politics and geopolitics around the world. We are using a series of measures this year and most likely next year to stimulate the economy and allow people to have a minimum of security, a minimum standard of living. But those measures are hampering fiscal situations of many countries. By the end of next year, we will most likely see the effects of continuous fiscal deficits that the world hasn't seen before, except in wartime. Therefore, education, the focus on the right type of education will be adamantly important, because that will be the only pathway to the future. And the big question is, what type of education should we provide? Of course, this is not a simple question, because there is not a single type that suits. It's not one size fits all. We have to have a portfolio of actions. This portfolio of actions will depend on distance learning, on having a good internet, on learning how to use these new devices, these new softwares, and so forth. But most important of all, we will have to learn how to teach people in a different way. Is it important to have good cooks? It is. And good cooks usually find a good job. So how can we teach someone to be a cook using a phone, a smartphone? Is it important to have good engineers? Yes. But before having good engineers, we have to have good research in engineering. So how will we learn to create roads to innovation? How do we learn to foster innovation in an environment where money will be scarce? So I bet that in the next 2 or 3 years, education will have to change a lot, and that we will have to look back and say, well, maybe what we were doing, we were spending too much money. We don't have that money anymore, but we still have to go after results, because there is a population that has to be retrained in order to find jobs. Of course, training the population, will involve bets. We will have to make bets on how the world is going to move. And we'll have to have incentive policies so that the supply of labor, of retrained labor, will find jobs. This will be a tremendous task. No country, I think, is prepared to do that now. Many will say that they are. Maybe China, because it has a huge industrial base, will do better than others. Countries that are over-dependent on the service sector will have bigger problems. It is on the service sectors that the marginal productivity of labor will increase many times, and therefore workers will be released from their task, from their jobs. So the challenge is there. The challenge is what we will do within the next 2 to 5 years in terms of retraining populations in a world where internal debt will become more unstable, where international commerce will reduce, where Keynesian policies may have a limited scope because of the state of fiscal accounts and so forth. So we have to put our minds to think that is not the solution for Brazil will be different than the solution for Saudi Arabia. I'm quite sure the solution for Saudi Arabia will be different from the solution to Australia and so forth. But there is one point in common. We cannot go back. We cannot just hope that the world will be as it was. The shock is here. The shock caused by the pandemic is a one-time shock, but there is another one coming behind, which is bigger than the introduction of the Bible by Martin Luther in Northern Europe. Martin Luther used an innovation that was already 80 years old, the Gutenberg printing machine, when he said, just have to read the Bible in order to communicate with God. People started reading the Bible, they became Protestants in Northern Europe, and then the whole history changed because a lot of people became educated, reading and writing. We are having the same phenomenon. Right now, we are just being alphabetized, but the world has started to change. It will not go back. And the main issue is productivity of a middle class. This will be the biggest shock because that is the pillar, the foundation of democracies and governments, even those that are non-democratic around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samuelson, and thank you, Dr. Heidi, for the opening remarks. Dear attendants, my name is Kamil Al-Ahmed. I work as a junior research fellow at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. I've been honored to work as a coordinator for this task force. Moving forward with this webinar, we're going to have a few more sessions and panel discussions. We will start now with the first panel titled Beyond Password Protection, Honoring Personal Identities and Maintaining Autonomy in Cybersecurity. The panel includes subject matter experts and will be moderated by Dr. Mohammed Khan. Dr. Khan is the lead author of the Task Force 6 policy brief titled Fostering a Safer Cyberspace for Children. He is currently a professor of cybersecurity at the Center of Excellence in Information Assurance at King Saud University here in Riyadh. Dr. Khan is the founder and CEO of the Global Foundation for Cyber Studies and Research in Washington, D.C. He is a full-time editor at the IAEA, and he is a fellow at the ET UK and a fellow of the BCS UK. Before I pass the mic to Dr. Khan, I would like to note to our dear attendants that during the session, you can ask questions using the Q&A feature placed at the bottom of your screen. We will make sure that all of your questions are answered. Dr. Khan?
Thanks, Kamil, for the nice introduction. Excellencies, T20 Chair, Dr. Fadl Turki, Task Force Co-Chairs, ladies and gentlemen, good day to you all. First of all, I would like to pay my profound gratitude to the T20 and the Task Force 6 lead co-chair, Dr. Heidi, for her kind invitation to moderate this great panel. And I also acknowledge the extraordinary efforts and contributions of the T20 Secretariat for organizing a series of wonderful webinars, as well as publishing our policy briefs and the final communique. I feel honored and privileged to moderate today's extraordinary panel discussion entitled Beyond Password Protection, Honoring Personal Identities and Maintaining Autonomy in Cybersecurity. As you know, that cybersecurity has just gone beyond a buzzword. It's getting more considerable attention and prominence in all aspects of human activities. Theft of data and intellectual property, spread of misinformation via online platforms, social media, and persistent and tenacious cyber attacks, which are threatening the fabric of our hyper-connected, yet too much interdependent society. As internet is permeating into the things that makes up of Internet of Things, the risks and threats are multiplied from machines to the individuals, and individuals to the critical infrastructure, and then critical infrastructure to the global security. So consequently, we become more vulnerable to a cyber pandemic, which could threaten our socio-economic system and prosperity. So cyber attacks are becoming more insistent and potentially more devastating as we increasingly depend upon the digital platforms, data connectivity, and technology. On the other hand, there is an increase in the number of internet users that has direct implication to the increase in the cyber crimes, which are estimated to have a loss of 6 trillion US dollars to the global economy by 2021. So to discuss all the issues and their solutions, today we are joined by an outstanding panel of 3 distinguished experts to share their insights and knowledge pertaining to the cybersecurity. And the format of this panel will be as follows. First, our panel experts will share their insights on the thematic topic of the panel and the most prevailing issues in the cybersecurity. Then we would open a discussion with our panelists, followed by the question and answer session. For our audience, if you have any questions, please write it down in the chat box, and please feel free to mention the name of the panelist whom you like to ask your question. And as I mentioned earlier today, our panel would discuss some key challenges and solutions associated with the personal identity, privacy, child online safety, importance of collaboration and autonomy in the hyper-connected cyberspace. So please allow me to introduce our panel experts. Our first distinguished panelist is Dr. Hind Khalifa. Dr. Hind is a professor of sociology at King Saud University here in Saudi Arabia. She has worked in different leading positions at King Saud University. She is a member of Child Rights Committee, Human Rights Commission of Saudi Arabia. She has published a number of research papers on children, youth, family, and social change. Her research interests include youth empowerment, child rights, and child cybersecurity. She has co-authored a policy brief on strengthening the Convention on the Rights of the Child, governing children's digital world. And this policy brief has already been published on the T20 platform. So, Dr. Hind, could you please wave your hand to our audience? Okay. So, our second panelist is Dr. Joshua Jackman. Dr. Joshua Jackman is an assistant professor at Sung Kyun Kwan University in South Korea. He has a passion for youth, science, and technology education. He has participated in DQ Institute activities for over a decade, and currently he serves as a strategic advisor at the DQ Institute. Dr. Joshua, could you please wave your hand to our audience? If yeah. Okay. On the last but not least, we are joined by Dr. Paul Toomey. Dr. Paul is a serial entrepreneur in the legal, cybersecurity, robotics, and biosecurity sectors. He is a fellow and core team leader for managing information and technology in the public interest at the Global Solutions Initiative. He is also a distinguished fellow at the Center for International Governance, Innovation, and a commissioner for the Global Commission for Internet Governance. Paul is the former CEO of ICANN, the global coordination body of the Internet. He was a CEO of the Australian National Government Office for the Information Economy and has been a deputy at the Australian Trade Commission. He is also a member of the SAP Artificial Intelligence Ethics Advisory Panel. Dr. Paul has contributed a policy brief entitled A Step to Implementing the G20 Principles on Artificial Intelligence, ensuring data aggregators and AI firms operate in the interest of the data subjects. Dr. Paul, could you please wave your hand to the audience? Okay. Thank you very much. So to keep the discussion rolling, please join me to welcome our first panelist, Dr. Hind Khalifa, who would discuss how can we strengthen the Convention on the rights of the children online and how can we govern the digital world for the children. So Dr. Hind, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. I would like to start by thanking Dr. Fahd al-Turki, T20 and G20 Secretary, Dr. Heidi Al-Askari, and everyone participated in putting this event together. Can you set the presentation, please? Okay. The authors of this policy brief, Dr. Wafa Taiba, Dr. Al-Jazi Shibeki, and myself, are proposing the adoption of protocol that should govern all forms of digital abuse, digital child abuse, exactly. And also to strengthening and reforming CRC, the Convention and the Rights of the Child. So our policy brief is built on this assumption. And if we look at current situation, why is it so important to have such a policy brief? We all agree, and we all know that digital technology has countless positive effects on on children and in their contribution and their education, creativity, entertainment, and etc. It's countless. Nevertheless, children are vulnerable to harm through the unethical programs and abuse. They are living every day through the digital world. And we know that digital technology has already changed the world, and as more and more children go online around the world, it is increasing and changing childhood. The growing numbers of users of internet under the age of 18 is tremendous. It's like 1 in 3 internet users are under the age of 18. Also, there is a growing body of evidence indicate that children are accessing the internet at increasingly younger ages. In some countries, children are under 15 are as likely to use the internet as adults over 25 years. It has never been easier for bulliers, sex offenders, trafficking and traffickers, and those who harm children to contact potential victims around the world. We see that digital connectivity has made children more accessible through unprotected social media profiles and online games. It also allows offenders to be not recognized, to be undercover, reducing their risk, while children having a very high risk. Therefore, children are on a high risk everywhere, inside their bedrooms, and playgrounds, and schools, streets, and this is becoming a fact for everyone. Therefore, this is the current situation, and this is why we think we have to have have protocol that governs children's use of the digital world. Can I have the next slide, please? There are many forms of risk associated with children being online. We can add them into risk of content, where a child is exposed to unwelcome and inappropriate content. Also risk of contact, where a child participates in a risky communication, and also risk of conduct, where a child behaves in a way that contributes to risky content. And I believe every family can relate to these types of risks because children are in every house are really under such risk. I will try to shorten the speech because I have like 5 or 7 minutes. Can I have the next slide, please? What are the challenges? So this is what we are trying to do, but what are the challenges? Many challenges face the implementation of child protection in the digital world. First of all, the growing number of users of the internet, as we said, under the age of 18. Statistics show the increasing number of children are suffering from gaming disorder, cyberbullying, sexual abuse, online gambling, obesity, etc., etc. And all statistics and the reports of the UNESCO and other UNICEF, they alarm how harm and how vulnerable are children in the digital world. Also, there is a growing rate of victims among children users of the internet and video games, and we all heard or read or saw how children are being bullied, how games such as PUBG, Call of Duty, Blue Whale, and it affected children to the extent that some of them, they committed suicide, they committed crimes and hurt themselves and their families and all around them. Also, there is a generational gap in technology and digital media, as the digital industry is rapidly growing and transforming. Young generation are capable of mastering new technologies faster, while the older generation do not. So there is a generational gap, which is also affecting the protection system. So this is a part of the challenges. Another challenge is related to effect of COVID-19. Can I have the next slide, please? UN policy brief.
Can we please expedite it a little bit? We have only 1 minute for you.
Oh, okay. So in the effect of COVID-19, what began as a health crisis risk evolving into a border child right crisis. This is a UN policy brief. Globally, it estimated that up to 1 billion children aged 2 to 17 years have experienced physical and sexual or emotional violence or neglect in the past year. Also, up to 85 million more girls and boys are exposed to physical and sexual and emotional violence during the COVID pandemic. The next slide, please. And I wanted to give an example from a study I did, but maybe in the discussion we will go to that. So what can we do? What can be done? We are suggesting to producing an active protection system It is a priority now. The United Nations adoption of a global protection approach built on the child rights to protect children in the digital world. Of course, this what we are proposing here is what is the unique about it. If I can have 1 minute, Dr. Muhammad, is that the main focus is in our policy brief is to build on and start from the articles in CRC, which already have a global agreement from the rights we stem from the rights of the child. We stem this protocol. The proposed protocol is to be as international law, and the implementation will be adjusted to each country. So any kind of system like this, it will need global collaboration. The G20 countries are key players in these, in implementing this protocol, and also the organization support is really a must and urgent to have this protocol in action.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hind.
Thank you.
So it was a great presentation. You have highlighted excellent points to protect children online, and especially the framework which you have developed in your policy brief, that you have 5 key elements for principles, prohibition, prevention, protection, and pursuing a fantastic, proposal. And that can be, I think that can be considered by the G20 to govern and strengthen the safer cyberspace for children. So now I would like to welcome our second panelist, Dr. Joshua Jackman, to discuss the global standards for digital literacy and digital skills. So the floor is yours, Dr. Joshua.
All right, thank you very much. So thank you for introducing me and giving me the chance to introduce some of the DQ Institute's activities on global standards related to digital literacy and digital skills today. If you could please skip to the next slide, please. So the DQ Institute was founded as a think tank organization focused on helping address the challenges of developing education and training programs to prepare originally children and more broadly people from all walks of life with the necessary digital skills to succeed in the modern world. Increasingly, as we've heard in today's talks, things are going digital, the economy, education, training, and how can we prepare people to succeed in this new age? So we think about this in terms of, such as the example in the keynote talk today with Gutenberg and the book printing, how that transformed lives, education, standards of living, and how we've lived through various industrial revolutions over the past several centuries. We've now seen a new industrial revolution with the rise of digital technologies, and how we've thought about educational standards in terms of things such as IQ and EQ before. We now recognize there's a need for a DQ, a digital intelligence quotient, that can serve as kind of a guiding framework to help people develop digital skills needed to succeed in the digital age. If you could please skip to the next slide. So these digital skills and DQ concept has been a key goal of the DQ Institute together with various international partners such as OECD, World Economic Forum, and the IEEE Standards Association. And we've recently been granted approval for developing the first global standards for this DQ concept centered around a global framework for digital literacy and digital skills. And these global standards encompass 3 levels of education and training platforms, focus on building skills and competencies around digital citizenship. So teaching people how to safely and responsibly use technology, digital creativity, how people can turn ideas into reality, and also how to succeed in the digital age through digital competitiveness. how to foster entrepreneurship, growth, and impact through digital technologies. And this encompasses a few main areas such as digital safety, digital security, digital rights, digital identity, among various types. We want to help people become skilled and competent users of the digital world so that they can succeed in this new technology age. Next slide, please. So these standards for DQ have recently been approved, and this push to create a global standards has come from the increasing recognition that digital literacy and digital skills are must-have in the modern digital age. Whether we talk about computers, the internet, AI, it's increasingly apparent that we must have digital skills to thrive in this age. COVID-19 really threw us all a curveball because the issues of digitalization became more acute. Remote working, digital education, highlighted the digital skills gaps. We've been talking about these issues, digital literacy, digital skills, for some time now, but we realize we must do more to decrease skill gaps, help people of all walks of life succeed in this age, because there are inequalities and we must do more to address them. So the DQ Global Standards for Digital Skills, Digital Literacy, Skills and Readiness were recently launched, and this was originally started 2018 as an effort between the OECD, World Economic Forum, IEEE Standards Association, and the DQ Institute. And the basic idea behind these global standards is that with DQ, nations can have a framework to actually incorporate digital literacy education into their national curriculum development. So before, there's always been a lot of talk of digital literacy, digital skills, but depending on who you talk to, when you talk to them, the actual definitions can vary. What are the skills and competencies that we want to develop? How can we make this uniform and standardized worldwide to make sure everyone has the same opportunities and advantages? So this provides a platform for global education by creating a globally accepted set of definitions and concepts. It can also help companies and industries with digital skills training for the workforce in terms of existing employees and also future new employees and job retraining. It can also lead to a platform for global coordination, monitoring, and reporting to help bridge digital skills gaps, along with job certificates. Next slide, please. And this effort for the DQ Global Standards is part of a broader effort that the DQ Institute has launched for the last few years for child online safety and digital citizenship, where actually DQ Institute has worked with stakeholders in over 50 countries worldwide and has reached out to over 1 million children worldwide to actually help them train them to develop stronger DQ skills to build digital skill competencies. And this has involved collaborations with governments and various international agencies, ICT companies, educational companies, nonprofits, schools, teacher awareness programs, family outreach programs, and children and youth. And we hope that this can serve as a foundation for reaching out to children worldwide and giving every child a chance to succeed with digital skills and literacy, and also reach out to additional populations that could benefit. People in job training programs, the elderly, the opportunities for DQ and how it can positively impact people's lives is limitless. Next slide, please. So we're just hoping that DQ can serve as a concept to really provide a unifying framework to help national governments, international agencies, from the local level to the international coordinating body level, develop a framework to help children, adults, a workforce develop digital skills and succeed in this modern age. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Joshua, for your succinct and concise presentation on a very important and timely topic. Indeed, the digital quotient developed by you and your team, has very big importance, and impact in the era of, fourth industrial revolution, like as you mentioned. In addition to the consolidated framework you presented, that can be adopted by worldwide stakeholders such as governments, NGOs, tech companies, even educational institutions. So now I would like to welcome our last but not least panelist, Dr. Paul Toomey, to discuss the role of G20 and other international organizations. Dr. Paul will enlighten us how collaboration and enforcement of cybersecurity principles could protect our data and privacy for the exploitation, especially when data harvesting is becoming a key concern for online users. Dr. Paul, it's your turn now.
Thank you, Mohammed. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you to Dr. Al-Turki and Dr. Heidi for helping to coordinate the Task Force 6 and also the T20 process as a whole. I suppose I just want to pick up two quick points just to perhaps lead us into our conversation. And first one, speaking off from Dr. Hind Khalifa's emphasis around children. I suppose one of the key messages I think that we as the T20 could give to the G20 heads of government, particularly to the Saudi presidency, is that this issue of protecting children and the vulnerable is incredibly important, and we need to remain focused on it. There have been quite a lot of differences in countries over the broad issue of cybersecurity over the last years, and particularly over the last several years. Differences about the whole GGE process at the UN, the norms in cyberspace, recent disputes about the application of the Budapest Convention for cybercrime, the new convention that may come out of the open-ended UN working group that was discussed. Lots of international disagreement about where we are on cooperation on aspects of both, broader parts of cybersecurity and particularly around cybercrime. I think nevertheless, it's still important that the G20 heads of government promote collaboration amongst their police forces to protect children and other vulnerable people from online exploitation and trafficking. So while the somewhat obvious political and other disputes will take place, I think one of the key messages we should be passing on is we need to look after the kids. And it's important to give the message to their police forces to continue to collaborate. And there is a lot of collaboration going on. Obviously, every month you hear news stories of multinational efforts being taken to bring down pedophile rings and others. I mean, in October last year, I think there was 38 countries were involved in bringing down a ring of more than 300 people. So that's, I think, a key role that needs to keep going. But I think you can always have heads of government telling the police forces, allocate enough resources and remain committed to collaborating with your peers around the world. Secondly, we've talked about, in this topic, we talk about autonomy in cybersecurity, maintaining autonomy in cybersecurity. And in the policy brief that Professor Kirsten Martin and I prepared, which looks a lot more on the issues of how AI works and large data aggregation and platforms work. I think one of the things government should think about a lot is what are the rules we've had in the offline world that are as applicable to the online world and can be thought of as such. And one of those is about protecting autonomy of individuals, particularly where they are vulnerable, such that the rules we've had in the offline world about the relationship between, say, doctors and patients, lawyers and clients, religious leaders and followers, etc., about looking after where one party has a disproportionate amount of power in terms of understanding the intimate data of the other, that they have to do that, use that data in a way that's in the best interest of the data subject. The doctors and psychiatrists have to work in the best interest of the data subject. That we should think about applying such offline rules to the online world. Because at the moment, we have a lot of data aggregators and others who collect vast amounts of information about people, which is, when you put it all together, gives you an incredibly intimate detail into the individual. And yet those aggregators don't even have a contractual relationship with the person, let alone any other. And so, there should be some test which says, no, you have to use this data in the best interest of the data subject, not just for commercial interests. So I think coming to this question on our topic around autonomy in cybersecurity, I think autonomy has also got to be around not just cybersecurity, but also this, as previous speakers spoken about, being safe, and especially those who are vulnerable, not being exploited completely by not just criminals, but also commercial platforms. And I might leave it at that, I think.
Thanks, Dr. Paul, for enlightening us with your insightful thoughts on the importance of cybersecurity norms and especially how our collaborative efforts can better govern in the chaotic cyberspace, and the data is becoming a new gold, and its protection and privacy is an important as a treasure. On the other hand, like you mentioned, that data remains while data is a prime target for the hackers, there is a new wave of cyber attacks that could impact our political or social values. and they can compromise our national security and sabotage the critical infrastructure. That is very, very dangerous for us, you know. And I think that the use of adversarial artificial intelligence and deep fakes are also threatening our cyberspace, which need to regulate, and we need more collaborative efforts to eradicate them. So now, to keep the discussion rolling on the topic, and very fantastic topic, you know, we have today, I would like to open our discussion by asking the first question to Dr. Hind on the speech she presented today a few moments ago about the risk our children are facing in the cyberspace. So, Professor Hind, why is it important to govern the children's digital world? Can you please tell us more about the current risk when the children are increasingly using internet for their schooling and having easy access to the social media platforms, online gaming applications, as you mentioned in your speech, and digital platforms? Professor Hind.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Muhammad. As I mentioned briefly about the challenges and about the statistics and the studies that shows the high risk children are facing today through spending long hours on the internet, through having easy access to the internet, to the video games, to connection online. It's almost like every house now, every family, their children are connected online. And because of the children's characteristics, vulnerability, curiosity, being a fast learner, going to the digital world, with excitement and all of that. These characteristics, and beside them, I see it like that there is three component: children characteristics, and their stage of when you are a child, your abilities, how you are perceiving the world, how your mind set, it can be easily affected by the surrounding. And if these surroundings are harmful, then children will be really affected on the long run. So the children, the long time consumed in being connected, and somebody of the audience had tagged this like a fourth risk, which is overuse of digital media. Yeah, the risk of overuse of digital media, and also the content of this media, the harmful content. So these three components, if you put them together, then you will have a very dangerous situation. And if I may give example about what was happening with the children during the pandemic restrictions, how children were in the house, but actually they were isolated for long hours inside their rooms, inside these devices, and they statistic again, as I mentioned in the presentation, show that there alarming number and huge risk on children. For example, the study I did with a group of researchers on, we did a research with the children. We asked them about the impact of COVID-19, of the pandemic, of the restriction on them, and how they spend their time. So at early age of 6 years old, they were spending like 10 hours online. And from 14 and up, they were spending like 14 hours, 16 hours, and they don't get enough sleep. And when we asked them about how their parents felt about this, how did they do any control, and many times it was no, because it was before school, and then they left them. So this is where the danger. Children are even in their bedrooms, and I like the. If I will borrow what the UNICEF described in the report, smartphones are fueling a bedroom culture with online access for many children becoming more personal, more private, and less supervised.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Thanks, Professor Hind, for letting us know about the risks which could harm our children being online. I would also like to add here one thing, that there are some extremist organizations which are using the digital platforms and they are, spreading some kind of violent contents, and unfortunately, children are becoming their soft target. So therefore, our policymakers and tech organizations, parents and teachers, we have to play an instrumental role to aware and protect children from these kind of formidable risks. So my next question is to Dr. Joshua about the wonderful standard which you have developed. And you also mentioned in your presentation that it is going to be the first global standard for digital literacy skills and readiness. So the question is how nations adopt this standard, and this issue seems especially important for the kids in the recent times when everything has gone online and they are doing online education. Dr. Josh, please.
Yeah, thank you for the great question. I think it is very important now more than ever. How can national governments and various educational organizations incorporate these global standards to help children? The example you just gave is a terrific example of an area where we really need to help educate children to be aware of those kind of cyber risks for misinformation, fake news, and various aspects such as that. In terms of actually how can you implement this, DQ Institute has spearheaded creating this global framework, and one of the area actually to implement it has been working with national governments in order to incorporate DQ into national curriculum as part of the actual educational goals. So we've actually done some successful pilots in Singapore and also many countries worldwide where we've worked on developing online and offline programs, various kinds, online courses, offline, in-person events, such as one-day workshops or class curriculums for several weeks, depending on the national government's goals. They have various forms of educational objectives to help students achieve target digital skills and digital competencies. The other flip side is educating students, but also in some cases, teacher training programs, helping develop teacher workshops so that teachers are more familiar with these contents and can also implement curriculum more effectively, as well as holding parent and family workshops to help parents be aware of these issues. Many parents may see their child using a smartphone for a lot of time, but they don't actually maybe aware of the implications of that technology overuse. But helping parents also become kind of vested stakeholders in this process, it can be more supportive to help the children recognize why DQ is important, why digital skills are important. So really there's multiple ways that we can engage global DQ standards, working with DQ Institute to develop programs that help students, teachers, and parents and families.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Josh. Yeah, it gives a very holistic overview of how could we empower every child with digital citizenship, like we're talking about, and how a global consensus could be, established for digital skills, literacy, and readiness to the DQ standard, which is fantastic. Now, my third question is with Dr. Paul. Could you please tell us about the current wave of cyber attacks against the individuals, businesses, and organizations, and especially the nation states? And there are increasing number of recent incidents on research labs. We have seen educational institutions and healthcare sector who are working to prepare the COVID-19 vaccine. So the question is how and what role G20 should play in the space, and how nation states could collaborate to mitigate these cybersecurity risks and their effects. Dr. Paul.
No, it's an excellent question, Mohammed. I mean, I think one of the best messages in realities we've got to give to the G20 leaders is them to try to find a way to find where they can cooperate in the broad area of cybersecurity, recognizing in other areas they're not. So you've pointed out that, you know, essentially what you've pointed out is that cyber means have become an essential part of nation states' intelligence gathering. And when it comes to such an event like COVID-19 or an industrial benefit around that or vaccine benefit, then not surprisingly, nation states are going to activate their intelligence services to find out as much information they can as quickly as they can to get an advantage. That's what intelligence agencies do. And then everybody else gets unhappy about it, wants to defend against it. That's what you do for counterintelligence. That's, you know, we've been doing that for several thousand years. There's nothing particularly new about that. It's just that it's faster in cybersecurity and more pervasive, and you can get more equipment faster, more information faster. We then have, similarly, we've got the issues of how people use cyber in terms of espionage in particular, about how you damage things and achieve sort of espionage, and then getting up closer to even potential cybersecurity use in warfare. Again, there may well be discussions at government levels about norms around that. There have been discussions in the UN which haven't necessarily come to full fruition. There's been governments agreeing, but there are layers in this discussion where people's interests are aligned. Dr. Hind was talking a lot about the risk to children. Everybody's aligned on the risk to children. The vulnerability to the vulnerable people in society. Most governments in the world want to protect their societies from criminal activity and straight fraud and theft. Some governments maybe marginally are sort of finding benefits of being engaged in some of that activity, but most governments are against that. And these are areas where I think it's important for the G20 to reinforce that there are things that bind us together in cybersecurity. Because the narrative of the last couple of years has been one of splitting. And, that may reflect the geopolitical realities of what we're facing at the moment, but, and that's sort of fine, it's not great. But I think one of the key roles the G20 could play is to say, yes, but there are still areas here we can all collaborate on, and we should make certain we do so.
Wonderful. Actually, we have so many questions coming from the audience also. So maybe if you just look at the Q and answer chat session, maybe you can reply to the respective, the person who has asked this question. And I think we are also short of time, so I'll be very quick to ask one more question to Dr. Hind about the leading organizations. They could play a very good role to mandate, and to build the policies to protect the children, all over the world, because they are going online, and like we discussed, a lot of risks to them. So what do you think that, how they should play a role as a G20, to address this challenge and make concrete actions to foster a safer cyberspace for the children? Dr. Hind?
Yes.
We have very short of time, so please just 1 minute.
Okay. It's, as we said, it's the collaboration with what we are asking is the G20 governments and the international organization collaborate with the United Nations in reforming the Convention on the Right of the Child by producing new additional protocol to it, which could, we could name it like optional protocol to the Convention on the rights of the child. And this protocol will introduce guidelines and regulation to all nations, strengthening the implementation of CRC and also governing and monitoring stakeholders. And this is very important because producers, society users, such as children, family, teacher, all are part of this. So it is hard, and it is not easy to do it, but we have to start somewhere, and I think we have to start from CRC, and we have to start today. I'm sorry, the time is so limited. I have so much to say, but it's
so
okay.
Dr. Josh, could you tell us about the standard which you have developed, that how this can play a pivotal role to ensure that our children remain safe online? Very quickly.
Sure. So I think, one of the issue is helping children succeed online, but also stay safe. So realizing what are, threats online, things that may, strangers that may be pretending to be nice, but actually just trying to entice children into vulnerable situations. So helping children develop critical reasoning skills to actually discern, what is, how to responsibly handle contents on the internet, how to perceive fake news versus factual news, and just how to critically analyze the things they see online and not take everything at face value without deeper thinking behind it.
Wonderful. So, Dr. Paul, how you think about the data traffickers, like you discussed in your presentation, and they are powered by the artificial intelligence and machine learning, and they are harnessing our data to make tons of money, and compromising our privacy and influencing our thoughts also, we have seen in the recent past. So how this challenge should be addressed from policy perspective and its real life implementation?
It's an excellent question. And I think what we're finding is that governments are increasingly turning their attention to this. I don't think, particularly, this is true internationally, but I think particularly true in the West, I just don't think governments are going to let 300 or 400 years of political and civil rights evolution be sort of thrown out the window because things appear on a computer versus in such real life. They'll take a while to react to it, but they're going to. And I think some of the ways they're going to do that is they're going to start saying, listen, there needs to be a restructuring of the power structure between incredibly powerful institutions that are collecting data, but are not using mechanisms to do it. I mean, so-called free transactions end up being very murky as to exactly where's the role of the market, where's the role of the price point, where's the role of regulation, just to give an illustration. So I think we're going to find governments going back, pushing back, saying, no, look, we need to have more market structure. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing the moves, especially in Europe, but elsewhere, that begin to reflect a little bit what happened in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s about industrial power. To start, governments and others putting rules in place which say, we really want to have this wonderful online world that the DQ Institute and others talk about, absolutely. But the power structures in society should not be exacerbated, they should be improved.
Thanks, Paul. We have a couple of questions from the audience, so I would prefer if you could write it down back to them, like somebody is asking about the question, education mandate, which education subjects should be dropped to make space for training in digital literacy and security, and how to ensure that students feel relevance in emotional attachment to critical elements of successful educational programs. So I think I would leave these questions to you. Maybe you can answer by typing back to the attendees. But because of the short of time, I would just like to ask our panelists to give one short message in just 30 seconds that what G20 community should think, and they can our policy makers and our tech industries, how can they play a more impactful and instrumental role to design the policies, and so that our communities can be protected from the burgeoning cybersecurity threats. So with you, Dr. Hind, very quickly, just in 30 seconds. Dr. Hind, you are mute, I think.
Yeah, again, I will emphasize on the collaboration, the need for collaboration between stakeholders, between governments, between societies, policy makers, and it is urgent. It is urgent. We are on a high risk, so we have to start today.
Oh, very good. Dr. Josh?
So, I also agree. And I think, just having these, deep global standards can really help actually unify these efforts. So, pretty much everything Professor Hind I said today, I 100% agree. Children are one of our most vulnerable populations in this digital age. And the more we can do to implement education and training programs to help them, I think we can do a lot, especially with the COVID-19 situation has expedited the need for such efforts.
Thanks. Dr. Paul?
I think the G20's had a couple of real highlights in being able to come together and collaborate. For instance, the G20 Principles on Artificial Intelligence in Japan last year was a real highlight. And I think the message really is keep finding the areas you can collaborate on that you can reinforce. And as we've said, one of those areas is about protecting the vulnerable online.
So due to the scarcity of time, I would like to conclude this session by reminding us all that we should never, we will never be, secure until each one of us becomes secure. So we should always remember that cybersecurity is our shared responsibility with our, policy makers, decision makers, governments, tech organizations. They are playing a very good role for us to protect. But it is our responsibility to protect ourselves and our communities. We should have very good cyber hygiene practices, cybersecurity awareness. And because it is commonly said that we as a human are the weakest link in the security chain. So one more thing I would like to just mention here is that October is celebrated at the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month in the US and elsewhere. That reminds each of us at all levels to remain vigilant, aware, and careful while being online. Once again, my special gratitude to all participants of this panel for the wonderful discussions on the thematic topic of cybersecurity. And also pay my gratitude to the audience for their excellent questions and attendance. You are welcome to contact us for your any questions, or to our panelists through emails or any means. So I would like to thanks once again. Over to you, Mr. Kamil. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khan, and thank you to the panelists for a great and really important discussion, especially during these challenging times we're living in. Moving forward, we have a very special and a very interesting presentation. Art is a universal language, transcending barriers of language and time. And T20 uses art to communicate its themes, priorities, and policy recommendations to all. We are very pleased to have with us Marwa Al-Muqaid. Marwa is a visual artist from Riyadh, and she will show us a video soon. And please note that English-Arabic translation is available. If you need it, select the audio language by clicking the interpretation tab at the bottom of the screen in Zoom. You have our attention, Marwa.
مرحبا جميعا. معكم مروة المقيط. أنا فنانة بصرية من الرياض. أعمل في مجال الفنون البصرية منذ 10 سنوات الآن. ممارساتي ما بين الفوتوغراف والفيديو، ومؤخراً المركبات الفنية. المشروع المعروض أمامكم اليوم وأنا فخورة جداً ويشرفني فعلاً أني أكون جزء من T20. مشروع البنط تم تنفيذه في عام 2019 بتكليف من المجلس الفني السعودي وبدعم من وزارة الثقافة. جاء هذا المشروع لغرض إحياء مبنى وبوابة وميناء البنط، وهو يعني مبنى ذو أهمية استراتيجية وتاريخية نظراً لتواجده يعني من تقريباً عمر المبنى تقريباً 140 سنة. العمارة يعني تم تصميمه من قبل العمارة العثمانية، وفي أيام وفي عهد الملك عبد العزيز رحمه الله تم تدشين هذا المبنى على أنه يكون ميناء البنط أو بوابة البنط اللي تستقبل الحجاج من جميع أنحاء العالم. الملهم بالنسبة لي كفنان بصري أو فنانة بصرية وجود أو وصول البحر إلى هذا المبنى. يعني البحر كان يعني قريب أو على يعني قريب جدا من هذا المبنى، فتم اعتباره من ذاك الوقت على أنه ميناء. الحجاج من جميع أنحاء العالم يصلون في هذاك الوقت أو في هذاك العهد عن طريق ميناء البنط، ويتم نقلهم إلى المبنى نفسه. وكان يعتبر المبنى تم تحويله طبعا في عهد الملك عبد العزيز رحمه الله، تم تحويله إلى منشأة صحية أو مركز صحي يتم فحص فيه جميع الحجاج القادمين إلى المملكة العربية السعودية من أجل أداء أو تأدية فريضة الحج. ومن بعد ذلك بعد ما يتم بعد إتمام الكشف الصحي يتم نقلهم إلى مكة المكرمة. فبالنسبة لي طبعاً مشروع البنط أول عمل فني في مكان عام أو بما يسمى في الببليك آرت، وتم استخدام تقنية 3D مابينج أو الخرائط الرقمية، وهي تسليط أو إسقاط خرائط رقمية على المبنى بشكل عام زي ما تشوفون في الفيديو. حاولت إني أخلق سرد بصري بسيط جدا يتم يعني يخلق لغة معينة ما بين المتلقي في الشارع ويعني يعطيه نوعا ما فكرة عن أهمية هذا المبنى وتواجده في هذا المكان، وأحياء كمان لذكرى كل الحجاج اللي كانوا يعني أتوا من جميع أنحاء العالم بقصصهم، بحكاياتهم، بمغامراتهم، إلى أن وصلوا يعني إلى مرفأ أو ميناء البنط في هذاك الوقت. فابتديت الحكاية في وجود البحر وقرب البحر من المبنى، ثم ذلك ترسيب بصري للقوارب أو وصول القوارب إلى المرفأ، وبعد ذلك وصول الحجاج ودخولهم إلى المبنى. فكان في كأنما أن ننظر إحنا من الخارج، ننظر إلى داخل المبنى ونشوف الحجاج وهم داخلين، فكان كأنه إحياء برضو يعني لهذا. وكذلك كمان تسليط أهمية العمارة العثمانية للمبنى نفسه باختيار يعني خطوط معينة تميز أو تبرز العمارة العثمانية لمبنى البنط. واختتاما وهو أهم شيء، ختاما بقصيدة أبي نواس التي كتبها بعد أداء آخر رحلة له للحج. اختتمت فيها صدر القصة البصرية الموجودة أمامكم. وشكرا. ما أسمع.
دقيقة بس دكتور مروة، احنا بنشغل الفيديو.
مشروع البونت بالنسبة لي كان مشروع مختلف تماماً، لأنه استخدام الوسيط بالنسبة لي كان وسيط جديد اللي هو استخدام الخرائط الرقمية أو 3D mapping. فكان فيه دمج ما بين تاريخ المبنى نفسه، وتاريخ عريق جداً يمتد إلى 140 سنة، وما بين استخدام التكنولوجيا المعاصرة. مبنى البنط أقدر أقول إنه هو كان الواجهة حقت جدة في ذاك الوقت. الملك عبد العزيز الله يرحمه عشان يسهل وصول الحجاج لجدة بنى رصيف للسفن اللي موصلة الحجاج من كل أنحاء العالم. لكل المبنى بعد ذلك وجود أو وصول القوارب إلى ميناء البنط، بعدين نشوف الحجاج وكان نوعاً ما فيها إحياء طبعاً لذكرى المنطقة، التاريخ، المبنى والحجاج وقصصهم. بعد ذلك يعني اختتمت المركبة الفنية أو الانستليشن بقصيدة للشاعر أبي نواس: تداخل الفنون مع الوسائط المتعددة، المالتي ميديا كمان، تداخل الفنون مع التصميم والعمارة حيعطي كثير أو حيفتح باب كثير للشباب الآن في الدخول في هذه المجالات. الدعم موجود ومستمر، والآن طبعاً أكثر مع تواجد المؤسسات الحكومية أو الغير حكومية التي تدعم بشكل عام الفنان السعودي. كل الأفكار اللي يتم طرحها يتم استقبالها بحماس، وبفكرة أنه إحنا نبغى ننضج أكثر، نبغى يزيد عندنا الوعي في الثقافة والتغذية البصرية بشكل عام في المملكة.
Thank you, Marwa Al-Muqayt. Very interesting visual art.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. So now to the second panel, titled The Digital Future and Wellness. And it's going to be moderated by Dr. Paul Granger. Dr. Paul is a co-chair of Task Force 6. He is a co-director of the Center for Education and Work and enterprise lead for the Department of Education, Practice and Society at the UCL Institute of Education. He had a long career in technical and vocational education and training, and was at one time a principal of a college in Liverpool. Dr. Paul, the mic is yours.
I thought you might like to know that it's pouring with rain here in the UK. My work with the G20 has been largely about the future of work, and it emerges that perhaps one of the reasons that we work is to keep body and soul together. But this is becoming less so, and particularly as things develop very rapidly under the present pandemic, we're beginning to think, well, what is the reason for work? And maybe we should be asking the question more directly about the way that we support our well-being. So I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel on the digital future and wellness. We're going to run it in a slightly different way, and I'm going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves as part of the presentation. So moving on very quickly to Claudia Costin. Claudia and I have worked together on the T20 since Argentina. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Okay, so very nice to be here. Thank you for the kind invitation, co-chairs and colleagues. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm the director and founder of the Center for Excellence and Innovation and in Education Policies in Getúlio Vargas Foundation in Brazil. I was previously the Senior Director for Global Education at the World Bank. And I was a member of the Global Commission for the Future of Work. So what I brought here to discuss with us is about the challenges of education, especially as stated in the SDG 4, where we have established the world, 194 countries have established that we want to ensure an inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. But at the same time, the future brings to the developing world, especially, some challenges, not only the consequences of the COVID crisis, but also the so-called Revolution 4.0 or the future of work with automation, you can call it robotization and massive jobs extinctions. Other jobs will be created, but demanding much more sophisticated skills. And this will bring not only loss of well-being, but also growth in inequality, stagnated, especially as facing stagnated productivity in many parts of the developing world, and fragile citizenship, which brings the menace of populism. And in the so-called developing countries, we have lots of problems in education, including low connectivity and low digital inclusion, huge inequalities in education prior to the COVID-19, and also a difficulty to attract the best students from the secondary schools to the teaching profession. And teachers receive their pre-service education in a course that does not properly prepare for the profession. So with facing that, how can we compare ourselves, the developing world, with countries that have good education systems? First, they focus not only in the digital world, but also in collaborative problem solving with creativity. So it's not enough to put computers and connectivities in schools. It's important what you focus upon. Personalization, including using digital platforms, and a huge change in the role of the teacher. Instead of being just a learning insurer, instead of being, just classes providers, they need to be learning insurers, which is completely different. We need to teach to think, to prototype. We need to involve in deep learning, and we need to develop 21st century skills, including social, emotional skills, not only in students, but in teachers themselves, so that they can role model the skills, the social and emotional skills we are talking about. And after the COVID, and with that, I finish my first presentation. What will we leave after the COVID era? We have to understand that crises are not only times of suffering, but times of opportunities. What the world has done in previous crises is to innovate and learn from what happened. And the education response to COVID will certainly accelerate a digital and hybrid future in education, even in the developing world. So connectivity of schools and households is now on the agenda. But it's also important to understand that some skills developed by students during the pandemic will be useful later, such as adaptation, openness to new realities, and autonomy, which is the long time dream of Dewey, Montessori, and Paulo Freire. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, for a very exciting presentation, and very disciplined too. Moving swiftly on, so we'll leave plenty of time for discussion. Angela.
Yes, hello. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Paul. I just want to first express my special gratitude to Dr. Heidi, Dr. Paul, the entire TF6 and T20 for being able to contribute again to yet another fabulous panel and webinar. I'm going to use just a few slides here to do my introduction. And so just to give you some context for the comments and the contributions that I hope to make to today's discussion. So I have served on both the T20 Japan and under the T20 Saudi Arabia. And the focus of the policy briefs and my contributions have revolved around digital inclusion, digital literacy, and how we bridge the gap in digital skills, but particularly for the developing world and those populations that are most vulnerable. And this year's briefs, if we move to the next slide, this year's briefs focus on taking a human development approach to this, in thinking about how we cannot just think about the skills and literacy that is needed and access, but how do we then translate that to tangible outcomes for employment, education, health, etc. And so if we move ahead, just a couple slides here. Yes, these are the briefs, and then the next one. So the theme of this panel is wellness. This is very important right now, especially within the context of TF6. And I just want to highlight a few ways that my expertise, I think I can bring to the discussion today of how wellness and the importance of wellness carries through for the economy, employment, and education in the digital age. And if we focus on the economy, I'm an economist by training, development and behavioral economist. And I hope as we move forward with the T20 and the next G20, that we continue to make progress in how we are measuring in a multidimensional way the livelihoods of people within the digital context. And we have seen that traditionally we have measured wellness in terms of gross national product and things like this, as traditionally economists have done. But we see this shift to economic wellness. We see the example of New Zealand with their wellness budget, Bhutan, to the shift to gross national happiness. And so I think one area that we can really focus on and improve moving forward is thinking about this within the larger human development context, and what are the key tangible outcomes we need to achieve with these digital skills. So next. So you can think of this as an onion. At the core are the skills that you heard from Professor Josh, and that you will also hear a bit from Mr. Vincent today. But we want to think about peeling these layers of the onion, because ultimately the goal, especially within the development context, is how do we achieve the sustainable development goals? And then next slide. So that's the economy. If we think about quickly with employment, I think the key thing here that the current and future T20 can really help to continue the work of is, you know, it's very obvious that we are going to be seeing growing digital skills divides among the most vulnerable populations. And it's not just that, but it's this next point and the theme that you've heard a couple times now, which is that we need to be better able to predict future vulnerability to poverty. We are going to see a huge increase in poverty, especially in the developing world, as a result of this. And we have to think about how do these digital gaps translate to poverty. And I know my colleague and I, who have worked on these briefs, Josephine Kashana from St. Joseph University of Beirut in Lebanon, that we've been working on trying to push us further in this direction. And I also echo the need for digital skills and most importantly, social, emotional, human skills at this moment. And then next slide. And then the third component that I hope to bring to today's discussion is related to education. And on this front, I remember being on the panel in May, and at that time I said, what were the challenges we're facing in education? Still working on online access, but in particular engagement. I think we've made a lot of progress in the last few months on that. However, where we are still facing challenges and where the current and future T20 can still shed some light and help us with is looking at best practices where we have a lot of flexible learning models and opportunities, but we need to think about how we still maintain quality of standards, especially with international testing standards, and still impart the digital skills within this context. Also, I really need to emphasize again, which I mentioned in May, that we have a growing mental health epidemic in the education system, but in the larger employment system as well, that we need to think about. And I think this group and this task force can shed a lot of light on moving forward. So I look forward to the lively discussion that's coming. Thank you.
Splendid. Thank you, Angela. And now we move on to Bhushan. I've got the wrong picture up. So can we bring Bhushan up?
I can start. Maybe it's the previous one with all of our pictures. But thank you, Paul, and thank you for co-chairing, and thank you, Dr. Heidi and team for putting on our virtual Saudi Arabia tour. It was a real pleasure to meet you all in person in January, and being part of these task forces for both Argentina and Japan. It's been a real privilege to work with these colleagues. So I'd like to pick this up from Paul's question about what does it actually mean to jobs? I think as Claudia and Angela mentioned, we know that there are significant challenges ahead of us. Economically, the health-wise, what does this mean to employment? What is the challenge on our education system? I think that's been well documented, and we obviously need to address that from a well-being, from an education, from many aspects of nutrition, as well as business community, and how they reskill and make sure as sectors get irreparably damaged, like maybe hospitality or transportation, our businesses change forever to be more digital online. How do we bring people along? How do we make them employable, whether it's for your organization or somewhere else? And there's an absolute huge role that policymakers in country and across the G20 can play a role there in terms of encouragement and encouraging disclosures. So we know there are challenges ahead. I also think it's important to understand, and Claudia, you mentioned this, what's been good and what we've learned and what surprised us about this pandemic. So we're talking about well-being and mental health across the world like we've never talked about it before. Talk is cheap and action speaks, but we're actually talking about well-being. We're talking about vulnerable cybersecurity populations. We're talking about how do you reskill all the most vulnerable people in communities if the very nature of the jobs they perform have been changed because consumers cannot mass gather or do not want to engage in certain retail activities in certain ways. So we need to understand that there are, our children have been somewhat resilient to homeschool. We understand there's digital divide and there isn't access around the world, but kind of understanding what has worked well will kind of put us in good stead in the future. And then my third point is, as we all know, there isn't a one size fits all for any G20 country. There are different starting points in terms of education. There are different starting points in terms of certain economies. Germany, for example, is very much product and goods and manufacturing driven. There are other areas of the world that are much more service sector that was driven. And so really understanding there's different starting points, there's different challenges around education, there's different challenges around different socioeconomic situations. In particular, G20 to round this out is, as Paul Twomey said, pick a few things that they can collaborate on. What's been really good in the last couple of weeks is this concept of stakeholder capitalism has now actually been better defined at the World Economic Forum. A number of business leaders and academic institutions came together and said, we want to make disclosures about a number of factors, including people, in aspects of how do we reskill, how do we create employment, how do we think about the dignity, how do we think about the diversity of a business workforce? So there are some green shoots that we can talk through a bit more in the panel. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Bhushan. And moving swiftly on, Vincent, we get to your slides now.
Thank you very much, Paul. This is Vincent Siegering. I'm a policy analyst at the OECD, and I'm also the author of an OECD publication named House Life in the Digital Age. And what we really looked at in this publication is how the digital transformation is really affecting every aspect of our lives. And what we tried to do with this presentation is really two things. First of all, we tried to understand what we can already measure in terms of the effects of the digital transformation on different dimensions of our lives. And secondly, we wanted to illustrate the divergent country experiences, because we believe at the OECD that there's a lot to learn in terms of best practices from different countries. And I'll show you in a minute just how different OECD countries have diverged in terms of the impacts. I won't dwell on this slide too much because I'm very aligned with Angela in that the OECD also really believes that it's important to look at progress from a multidimensional perspective. We have developed the OECD Wellbeing Framework in the context of the post-GDP movement, and this framework really looks at 11 dimensions that we think are important for a good life. But if you go to the next slide, I'll show you that what we did with this particular project is really take this framework and do a very rigorous inventory of all the ways that the digital framework affects people's lives. So if you could go to the next slide. This is just a sample of the scoping exercise that we have done, but we've tried to collect data on the different kind of possible opportunities and risks that the digital transformation may have in these various dimensions. And so we're talking about everything, Bhushan was talking about jobs. So in the area of employment, we looked at the risk of automation, for example, effects of job quality, which are actually quite ambiguous because there are some potential effects on kind of job security and job stress. But also we have to keep in mind that at least in OECD countries, jobs were much more physically demanding in the past. And so the move towards the digital transformation has alleviated some of the job strains as well. Moving on, we looked at work-life balance, at teleworking and time pressures, on the effects of the digital transformation on social interactions and mental health, et cetera, et cetera. And just to wrap this up, one of the things that we really try to do in this exercise is to look at inequalities in each dimension, because we are all aware that the digital transformation comes with a risk of a digital divide. We are now speaking of the third digital divide, the first being in terms of access, the second being in terms of skills. And now there's really this digital divide also in the way that people use digital technologies and the opportunities that this presents to them, not just in terms of income, but also in terms of, you know, access to social support, health, education, etc. And so wrapping up with the third slide, this exercise allowed us to take the OECD countries and to look at the different divergent experiences that OECD countries have in terms of these opportunities and risks. So we took all the opportunities and all the risks and put them neatly into one graph. And what this shows is that there's really different experiences. First of all, you have countries in the top right quadrant of the square, such as Luxembourg, the United Kingdom, that have greatly reaped the benefits of the digital transformation. There's a lot of digital infrastructure, but there's also risks. There's gaps in digital skills. Not everyone is benefiting from the transformation. Then you have a set of countries that are also exposed to the risks in the top left quadrant, but where people are not really benefiting from the opportunities. It seems to me that, or it seems to us that there are some countries that are doing it right, and those countries can be found in the lower right quadrant, that are able to benefit from the risks of the digital transformation, where people can use digital technologies to further themselves through education, by accessing healthcare, by increasing their social network, but without these or with less of these negative side effects. So I think this was a really important exercise for us to do. And I guess the next step is to better understand what exactly are the drivers of these divergent experiences. And, you know, the positioning of Finland in that bottom right quadrant already hints to something that many of the speakers today have already said, and that is the importance of education and skills, because this really does underpin all the dimensions of well-being and the way that we are affected by the digital transformation.
Thank you, Vincent. Fascinating that we've got a whole new measurement scale here. We were having a sort of chat around yesterday, and we sort of assumed that perhaps all roads would lead to education in the long run. So a great finish there. In that chat, Angela threw at me a question, which is to identify just the single most pressing issue which needs to be addressed when it comes to digitalization and wellness. It's a great question, Angie. Start us off. What's your most pressing issue?
I think I kind of laid them out just a moment ago. I don't think I could maybe identify a single most pressing one. You know, I think in the T20 context, for the economy, I think we really have to think about metrics and measurement in a multidimensional way of livelihoods. It's all about people's livelihoods now, this transition to rethinking work and life balance, and people are starting to put life first through the COVID situation that has happened in terms of priorities, if they have the luxury to be able to do that. Some people do not.
And picking up on Vincent, it's measuring new things in this new world, isn't it? Because, you know, we didn't have the digital divide before we had digits. So yeah, that's great. Claudia, what would be your most pressing issue? You're muted. Claudia, you're muted.
Yes, sorry. So I think the most pressing issue is inclusion. I live in a country, Brazil, where social inequality is huge. And with the COVID and also with the future of work, this inequality is highlighted, and we have the pressure to do something about it. And this something can be done through social policy, but especially through the most important one, which is education. And it is not only the regular education, it's about skills. It's about feeling that their learning and life can get together to develop the skills we need for the future, but also to be able to enjoy the present, which is quite challenging right now. We are one of the countries most affected by the COVID. We are still on working at home mode, and schools are still closed, but which makes things much more challenging. So my response is think about inclusion.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you finished your talk by talking about some of the educational greats. It's a long time since I've heard people talk Dewey and Montessori and things, and working for conclusion. It seems to me that you've identified two challenges. Obviously, there's the digital divide, and with differing nature of poverty around the world, there's going to be a materialistic divide in those people who have access to the equipment and others. But there's also this changing nature of work. And you talked about these new skills, like thinking skills and so forth. Now that too could divide society, couldn't it? Because you might have jobs for the intellectuals, but not for the others, which is potentially divisive.
Certainly, yes. So these demands from schools, even at a distance, dealing with the situation of my country, to teach kids to think, not only rote learning or getting to know facts by heart, which is quite different than the traditional teaching approach that we take here, even through digital devices. Because yes, we have been having distance learning, some kind of distance learning or learning at home right now. But in dealing with lack of connectivity, we have that through TV as well, through radio, and through printed materials. But the hard part of it, Paul, is about learning to think based on what you are learning, which we are not doing.
Absolutely, because machines are really good at learning by rote. It's the one bit of education we do not need anymore.
Yeah, definitely not.
Lucian, you were eloquent on this emerging theory in this conversation about vulnerability. What do you think is the most pressing thing that we need to do to ameliorate this tendency to people becoming more vulnerable, which has come out of both of the panels?
Yeah, so I agree with the points around inclusion and metrics, but for me, the connection there is skills around future. Within any country, there's a different starting point. So for some countries, it might be, how do we build entrepreneurial skills? Small, medium businesses have been really impacted with their ability to manage cash and balance sheets in a different way to large businesses. But how do you teach maybe a vulnerable population or a stay-at-home population to work from home in an entrepreneurial way? How do you teach new design skills or infrastructure skills if cities are looking to need to redesign themselves? So really understanding relevant for your country, for your city, what the relevant digital skills are table stakes. I think we've mentioned that, but there are other skills, whether they be design, manufacturing, taking a nurse practitioner and teaching him or her digital skills so that they can actually administer telehealth. So really taking a starting point to inventory what you have and what you need, and that will be different based on the industries and the types of businesses and where you choose to have comparative advantage within a country or a city.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting. Whenever you respond to your questions, you're very articulate on the way that society is layered and complex. That what may be true for one group is not necessarily true for another group. Which is, we've got to get into that level of nuance. But at the same time, we've got Vincent, who's coming up with a whole new measuring scale, which is identifying new areas for investigation, new potential problems. And I'm fascinated by this notion of the third digital divide. I think that's a really interesting concept, and will spawn a number of PhDs. I've no doubt as people sort of move into researching it. Vincent, what's your most pressing issue?
Well, I share the themes that have already been brought up. So with the aim of keeping the conversation original, one thing that I haven't heard yet in this conversation is mental health. We know, or we have great suspicions, that the digital transformation has a variety of different impacts on our mental health, both through the way that it reshapes our social networks, through the way that it affects our use of time, the way that it impacts our levels of stress and anxiety. But here too, there is a measurement frontier, and there have been a lot of academic debates about, for example, the impact of social media on anxiety and depression. And we're largely dependent on, cross-sectional studies here. And so these kind of linkages have been explored, but they haven't been definitively answered yet. And so that is something that I think is a measurement frontier that we have yet to explore further. And the OECD is doing one thing to contribute to this, and that is we are going to propose to countries that collect large survey data on ICT access and use to include measures of subjective well-being, of experienced happiness and worry and stress in these surveys, so that we can better understand the interaction between digital technology use and experienced well-being, and compare countries.
That's great. And while you've got the floor, we've had a very interesting question come in about Goodhart's law. Now, I've never heard of Goodhart's law before, but but you hopefully have. Your response: are we just measuring for measuring's sake, or is this really taking us somewhere?
I have to admit that Goodhart's law is also not familiar to me, but I think that is a fair question. And when you look at the slide that I presented, this may seem really abstract, but at the OECD, we have direct experience with policymakers in countries that are using this data to really look at, what are we doing that got us here in this quadrant, and what are other countries doing that got themselves there? And then we organize a platform for countries to exchange with each other, to exchange on best practices, and to learn from each other's policies. So I agree that this may seem very abstract when presented in a slide like this, but I do really believe that policymakers can draw really useful lessons from these types of exercises if they are interested in drawing them and implementing them.
Thank you. I'd like to throw another question at you all. I'm suffering my second extended period of lockdown. I'm actually tested positive for COVID at the moment. So I am confined to barracks. And yet, I'm escaping out of the house and talking to you people all around the world. So home working for me is proving quite useful. But at the same time, we've got Bhushan's sort of layering of society. It's not easy if you've got young children running around the house. My son's been working from home and the toddler has been driving him crazy. And I just wondered if you had any comments to make on the impact on mental health of extended periods of being locked down or having to work from home. Claudia, do you want to start us off on that?
Yes, definitely. And here again, inequality comes into the picture because I have a comfortable apartment with books and connection and I am a grandmother, so just me and one of my unmarried son and my husband, so it's easy. But if you look at the slums, the favelas in Brazil, it is horrible because kids are having to learn through the one mobile phone that their mother have, 4 kids in an unhealthy environment that is not prepared for that. So it's very nice to think about home office as the one I'm right now. Another thing is with inequality in the picture. So mental health can affect, certainly it does affect middle class as well, and even the richest, but it's so uneven the way it affects different people. And yes, in Brazil, we had made a choice to open bars and open restaurants and not opening schools. And so some kind of mental health protection that could come from schools if they were prepared for that would help us a lot and help mothers as well.
Yes, the issue of caring at the same time as trying to focus on communicating outwards, it is putting an intolerable burden on some people. We've had a similar experience in the UK to your example about lack of access to the kit, to handsets, because colleges were closed in the initial lockdown in March. And many colleges responded by purchasing laptops and distributing them to the students. But some students do not have premises which are sufficiently secure that the laptop is there when you get back to the room. They just disappear. So it reinforced a class divide, because not only do you need the equipment, but you need a secure environment in which to keep it, and you need the privacy to use it.
And autonomy to learn.
Yes. Yes.
Because young children do not have the autonomy to learn. And if the parents are outside home trying to bring food to the household.
Yeah, absolutely. How's
can I build on Claudia's point?
Sorry, Bijan, yeah?
Just to quickly build on Claudia's point, I also think it's remiss if we don't mention that a number of essential workers, a number of employees around the world are actually working on site. And so the physical safety, the mental anxiety, especially if they have to arrange childcare, is a real challenge. The US, everyone thinks of as a service economy. In August, 75% of the work done by US employees was in a physical location. We all talk about work from home and they are big challenges, but I think we need to remember that a number of people are working with a lot of mental health and anxiety about the health outcome from a physical work site.
Yeah, and the health outcome one is an important point. Angela, how's lockdown been for you?
So yes, I want to build on all of this too, because I'm a teacher and educator, and I'm in the throes of it and thick of it right now. I've been teaching for over 25 years, and I have never seen the amount of stress and anxiety. And in fact, it's now being classified at our institution very clearly under the disability office. And students are really struggling, and colleagues, educators, teachers are really struggling with this on so many levels. And as a behavioral economist, I see, just with my own teaching, but with the students, we are spending hours on these devices, literally hours in front of a camera. And I have even noticed with my students how they're processing information that is coming through to them is very different. I've been having to restructure, just to the lessons and things to keep their attention and attention span, because this is affecting quality. I think we are having these conversations now in the community that it is tough for students to maintain the attention, rightfully so. It's exhausting, the exhaustion levels to teach, and then to also for the students to stay attentive. Some of them are on these things for 6-8 hours a day, listening to these videos, a lot of just videos. And so I think we have to really think about, in fact, I will say personal story is, I make the big push now, 10,000 steps a day. Get out of your desk, get away from the computer. My research team, we are all on walking, running, 10,000 steps a day, get it in. Like, we have a challenge now. With my students, I say, did you do some yoga? Did you get your 10,000 steps in a day? We have to, as employers and educators, we have to say this right now at this moment, that we need to take care of ourselves as we make this transition and think about what good physical mental health means as our brains start to rewire and our learning processes start to rewire.
Thank you. Vincent, is this something you can measure? Does this impact on your well-being scale?
I was actually going to answer this question from a personal perspective, but I can try to tie the two together. One of the things that I really learned from this past half year is, and that is something that we have studied and thought about, is that there's many different functions of work. From one perspective, I'm extremely fortunate to have a job and to have an income. But we also know from academic studies that income isn't the sole function of having a job. A job provides us with a lot of different things that we really need as humans. It provides us with a sense of purpose, self-actualization, social network, time structure, et cetera, et cetera. And that is something that I had thought about in an abstract sense, but that I hadn't really experienced yet before, because I now realize that really part of why I go to work is also to see colleagues and to have that interaction, and I think that teaches us something about the future of work, in that we need to be careful not to, put all our bets on productivity and automation, because in the end, we're going to want to do something ourselves as well. We won't want to actually give it all to the robots.
One of the things which has been talked over in this period of the G20 is whether or not there's a future in a universal basic income. And what you say is interesting, because it begins to disaggregate work from income. It may be that we don't think that work and income are interrelated in the future. You have an income established in some way, and you do work for the very reasons that you've just very tightly articulated, Vincent. I've got a really interesting question from the floor here. How should policymakers engage with industry and firms when designing skills for work in the future? And have any countries been particularly successful in this area? And this has always been a disconnect, hasn't it, between policymakers and the people who are actually designing the things. I mean, we just have to look at the improved quality of these sort of platforms over the 6 or 8 months of the pandemic, so that you have industry designing wonderful gadgets, but policymakers are sort of rather outside of that. So how do policymakers get closer to the people who are really designing these gizmos? Anyone want to volunteer to start on that?
I would just say I think that the starting point and the scale is important. So Singapore's done a great job, but it has a great starting point with education. It's also relatively small. I think it's really a local challenge that's going to be solved in cities, even in large countries. And I think there's a few case studies, but it's a community responsibility. It's educators and policymakers and businesses coming together to say what's right for my community. So it's going to take, you know.
Right, sorry, you faded out there. But it's interesting you identify Singapore, because there isn't a question of scale here, isn't there? There's a new sense of region. And you know, if you go to Singapore, within reason, you can meet everyone you need to, because it's a confined city-state. And therefore, a dialogue is possible. I went to Luxembourg years ago when I was about setting standards in skills. And they said, well, if we want to set a standard in carpentry, we go down to the local furniture factory. So there is a scale issue. Anyone else want to join in on this? We've got 2 minutes.
Well, I can just add, like, if I'm looking specifically at the policymaker side of this, I think this kind of goes to the role of the T20, G20. I think what they can do is help to support industry and the public sector from a regulatory standpoint, but also a worker protection standpoint in helping to think about what are the policies that need to match with what the direction is that needs to happen for the skills that we need. I know there's sometimes some constraints and barriers that, again, this comes back to Claudia and the inclusion issue, that sometimes we need to create some sandboxes to release some regulatory pressures or to create some new infrastructure with oversight or consumer protection, worker protection, things to facilitate and make people feel comfortable to have the right environment for innovation and to move us forward to create some of these new skills.
Thanks, Angela. Claudia, a quick thought?
Yes. One point that comes to my mind is getting civil society and the private sector involved, not only in demanding workers or putting some jobs offers in the market, but in instructional design for certain reskilling, upskilling activities. Normally, the private sector doesn't connect to education as it should. And the education sector is very prejudiced against the private sector and civil society. So we need to work much more together, including in the education of young children, not only adults, because it's about their life. And a big hunch of life is devoted to work. So the future of work will be much better if we work much more together, not in clusters.
Thank you, that's great. And Vincent, quickly, which country is good at it? And you're not allowed to say Singapore.
Well, there are some classic examples of countries that do really that have good models for this, where there's tight links between universities and companies through apprenticeships programs. Countries that come to mind are, Germany, Switzerland, Austria. They've got this model figured out pretty well. So that is a corner you could look at. Great,
thank you. And bang on time. Back to you, Heidi, and your excellent sharing of this this webinar.
Thank you so much, Paul. Can I just thank everybody on both panels? The first panel under the chairman and moderation of Dr. Muhammad Khan, and the very scintillating conversation that I have just listened to. It has been music to my ears to hear everybody talk about these topics that we've been embedded in for this past year just come to life. I thank each and every one of you. I know everybody's in different time zones. And I love how you just made it real for all of us. I thank you for highlighting the topics of inclusion and mental health and wellness and making this real, you know, to moms sitting at home and dads sitting at home. It has been a true pleasure to listen to everyone. And I just want to go back real quick to you know, Dr. Carlos. He said, we will not go back. And I think, you know, particularly maybe at the beginning of the pandemic, I thought, no, we're all going to go back. Everybody's going to bounce back eventually. It's human nature. We like what we like. I truly do believe now that we are at a huge turning point in terms of us as human beings. And I just want to take a second to savor this time. We will all look back and say, remember that time we had that discussion where it was just a changing point in history. So thank you for being part of this journey with us. Thank you for contributing your time, your energy, your passion, your know-how, your knowledge, and for documenting it and being so candid with us. Time is precious. It waits for no one. And truly the time is now. We all have a responsibility to step up and come together and work together for the betterment of all of us. And having said that, you know, again, thank you, Paul. I know that you've tested positive this week. He didn't miss a beat with us. He was with us in all the prep and he was ready to go. And that gives me the segue again to say that I've been so honored to have such amazing co-chairs, colleagues, new friends, and I look forward to continuing this relationship with everyone. Having said that, this is a segue into my next guest, who's also been a co-chair and a very dear friend over the years. Unfortunately, Dr. Victor Pineda was not able to be with us personally live today. He is a little bit under the weather. He is in the United States. He's where the California fires were raging. He had some almost apocalyptic pictures that he shared with us, and we were very concerned. And yet he said, this is very important. I want to make sure that I'm present and we support and we have our unified message. So I am so humbled and proud to be able to present to you Dr. Victor Pineda, who is the president of World Enabled. He's a Chancellor's Research Fellow and an adjunct professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning at the University of California, Berkeley. He's a leading global expert on disability rights, policy, planning, and design, and has worked closely with the US Department of the Treasury, World Bank, United Nations, UNESCO, UNICEF to develop policies and programs that include persons with disabilities as equal stakeholders in development. He was appointed by President Obama as a board member for the Access Board. He's a founder and driving force behind the Global Compact on Inclusive and Accessible Cities, the Cities for All network that emerged out of a need for the voice for the global disability community in local and international decision-making processes guiding urban planning and development. So joining us via pre-recorded recordings, I humbly introduce to you Dr. Victor Pineda.
Thank you, Kamal. Thank you, Kamal, and what an honor to participate with all of you. Thanks for Dr. Fahad Al-Turki, the Vice President of Research at King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center. And my friend Dr. Heidi Alaska, CEO of Special Olympics Saudi Arabia, for being our fearless co-chair lead, and for involving me and allowing me to elevate the role of human vulnerability, human resilience in these current digital disruptions in the digital age. My talk on Control Alt Activate, reimagining and inspiring new pathways for all, really brings to light part of my work with the Urban 20 Task Force, as well as the work that I do with the Global Council on IoT, Robotics, and Smart Cities. I'm also a member of the US Federal Access Board and a professor of urban planning at the University of California, Berkeley. So my reflections are really intended to help us systematically reimagine what we need to do with our institutions during this great COVID-19 reset. Our work for our task force and the work of our members has been critical. Policies to reform education, provide opportunities for training and entrepreneurship, addressing a range of issues, populations from young people to women. We really had a broad mandate to look at governance frameworks and data flows and artificial intelligence while illuminating the impacts of these disruptions on employment and education and the economy. Some of the priorities, whether it was education, entrepreneurship, or global governance frameworks, have really been elaborated well in the policy briefs. And after reviewing some of those policy briefs and reviewing some of the content that our colleagues within the G20 processes, not only in the T20, but in the U20 and other engagements, we've really noticed that we're building on achievements and commitments of the past presidencies. So we should really be reflecting upon what makes our contributions unique. What are the two key factors that we think we can elevate in this year, the year of the global pandemic? I would say those are number one, digital disruptions. Number two, the systematic and endemic experience of human vulnerability in these systems that we have inherited. So how do we build the new systems? Well, let me start with the first point, digital disruptions, and then start to embed my own thinking on equity, inclusion, diversity, and ultimately access to building a fourth industrial revolution in the face of everything we've learned through the pandemic. So the G20 ministers responsible for digital economy met on July 22nd, 2020, and they talk about harnessing digital technologies and make an impact for all, the 21st century for all. They had the G20 Digital Economy Task Force that also invited the OECD and the ITU knowledge partners. Now, what was unique is that we saw in those gatherings, as well as in our own policy papers, that there is an unprecedented demand to advance the standards of living through human-centric, data-driven, and evidence-based policy, and looking at how that human-centered well-being can also increase economic competitiveness, create a higher quality job, and promote better services in cities and communities of all sizes. I think and part of that work includes ensuring that cities also are not only resilient and smart, but also inclusive and accessible. And I've done a lot of work to that regard. But digitalization also poses a challenge. We want to bridge digital divides. We want to help develop more effective policies and strategies, and really push forward this idea of inclusive innovation, not just agile, not just flexible, but really inclusive. And the idea of non-discrimination and non-discriminatory environments that are open and fair, that allow innovation to actually help us to expand those underlying values is going to be of incredible importance. So advancing inclusiveness through human-centric approach could not be more vital now. there's over 1 billion people in the world that live with a disability, and about 25% of all people that encounter barriers. 25% of all people living in cities encounter barriers due to age or disability. So we recognize that universal, secure, and affordable connectivity is fundamental, but also the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, the social infrastructure should be augmented by the digital infrastructure, should be supported. Those values should be taking root. Now, a lot of these connectivity efforts and infrastructure efforts, digital skills development, and the affordability of the internet, and closing the digital gender gap and the age gender gap and the digital disability gap really would require a lot of creative and collective thought. Now, artificial intelligence could also be pointed to learn and to maximize where those fault lines are. It can be pointed towards helping to address those gaps in exclusion. So the potential of AI to accelerate progress towards not only the inclusion targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, which I believe are incredibly important, but really all targets of the Sustainable Development Goals has been already widely discussed throughout this whole process. But we have to keep in mind that AI has the potential for negative or positive impacts on the future and equity of work, the future of equity, of security and trust, and ethical issues related to human rights as well. We don't yet know what that impact will be, but we have to stay vigilant. The G20 AI principles that were drawn from the OECD AI principles also give us areas to think through and think through how those will end up shaping responsible stewardship and recommendations for not just trustworthy AI, but for navigating the economy, education, and employment through this digital age, through this fourth industrial revolution. So I'll go through some of those ideas here to share my thoughts. So we know that in Osaka in 2019, the G20 leaders acknowledged the importance of a lot of the conversations that we're building on, everything from trust to cross-border data to AI, and even launched the G20 Smart City Alliance, which is an alliance where I've been a founding member of and have worked with that alliance to really think through how our work collectively could take us to a more equitable destination. And I'm delighted to report that we have convened global experts and met on an equity and inclusion goal of the G20 Smart City Alliance, which was to launch the ICT accessibility and procurement policy for smart cities. That's one example of how sustainable and equitable development can be brought into the G20 process, and how the G20 process could also continue to support innovations that give us better outcomes. So the G20 Smart City Alliance and the historic launch of these policies is going to be an important step forward. But if we go deeper into smart cities and digital technologies, they are going to end up shaping the way our economy functions, how people work, and how people learn. And unless we're engaged from a rights-based framework and a rights-respecting framework on building sustainable and inclusive smart cities, we have the risk of leaving communities out that just aren't able to compete in this new structure that was going to be unfair from the beginning. So it's much better to build in the equity and inclusion to enhance the well-being and community resilience and provide bridges of financing to help people go to a more holistic approach of smart cities and communities that really become vital, inclusive engines of innovation and investment. So how do we enhance evidence-based policy to contribute to that inclusive innovation? I think that improving data availability, specifically on things that are data deserts, like people with disabilities, older persons, really helps us ensure that we measure what we value. Furthermore, looking at the work that private sectors is doing, educational institutions, civil society, technology companies, on equity and inclusion and creating a knowledge hub around accessible and inclusive policies and programs is key. And that's why we're committed to ensuring that there is a global knowledge hub on inclusive and accessible cities. And we'll be working with a lot of your colleagues and governments to do that. And we encourage that we continue to not only collect data, but even define new indicators so we can measure these challenges. Ultimately, the way forward is through engaging groups that have the lived experience and have that experience shape the way that we build the new systems. And we want to thank the Saudi presidency of the G20 and all of the organizations that have collaborated in this process to ensure that we recognize that this digital transformation does have the capacity to give us new hopes for tomorrow. An inclusive economic model that is also equitable and achieves and streamlines our collective efforts towards measuring progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, and ensuring that we can prevent exclusion, that we can tackle the root of inequality, that can aid businesses and industry and incentivize this inclusive innovation as a result of our more common human understanding that we're all in this together. The COVID-19 pandemic really was a cross-cutting experience that can bring us together like never before. Let's not waste this opportunity to really do our work and put equity, access, and inclusion as core fundamental values that transverse all the work that we do. I will be committed to this. I encourage you to look at the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as a model for really building in a lot of equity for all people, not just persons with disabilities, into your policies and programs. So thank you so much. And I really want to ensure that we continue to monitor the impact, continue to be transparent, and continue to sort of invest in these infrastructure and these platforms that will give us better outcomes. Thank you all for the time to be with you today. And I look forward to the following presentations from Giovanni, Verona, from Bocconi, and moving forward with this work with you all. Thank you. How can we use good design to improve the lives of 1 billion people? And how can we build entire cities that are more accessible, inclusive, and resilient? And how can we ensure that the future is accessible to everyone? I'm Victor Pineda, and I'm passionate about the future of cities.
There are people like me in every city around the world. And the issue is whether or not government and the private sector want to engage with people like Victor and myself.
Now I can see a very positive change in the lives of women with disability when they realized and accepted their disability. They got trainings on gender, on disability, on leadership.
Making sure that disability issues are part of our everyday conversations and decision-making is critical.
Together, we're going to get a greater appreciation of the range of talents, preferences, and experiences of people with disabilities, who may happen to be your neighbors, your friends, your family members, and who may have a lot more to share if only we eliminate the barriers.
Thank you, Victor, and we wish you a speedy recovery and good health. And we're thinking about you and praying for you today. So last but not least, and in a huge effort to at least start bridging over to those who will take the torch after us, I am very excited and very happy to invite Gianmario Verona from Italy with us here today to give an Italian perspective, sort of a head start view before we hand over our torch, to get sort of a sneak peek on what's been going on this year. There's just been a few little things I think that are important that we would like to share with you and hand over to you and see what your thoughts are in terms of moving forward and taking T20 into the next phase. Gianmario, it's all yours.
Thank you very much indeed. And let me say that it is a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you some views. And more importantly, as you just mentioned, to bridge for the incoming conference next year. So let me get started for thanking the Secretariat of the Saudi Think 20. And let me, for everyone, particularly thank the chairman, Dr. Fahad Al-Turki. And let me also thank the Getulio Vargas Foundation, in the person of the president, Carlos Ivan Simonsen Lille, as co-host of this important initiative. And let me finally say that after this outstanding talk of Victor Pineda, it's very hard to say something smart, but I will try to do that. I'm sure that the Italian presidency of G20, first of all, will guarantee continuity with the works done this year, given their specific relevance for the hosting country, for Italy, but more broadly for Europe and I would say for the world. And let me also say that I'm particularly pleased that Bocconi University will take actively part to the T20 works in collaboration with the Italian Institute for International Political Studies, ISPI. And will also host specifically, hopefully in presence next year, one of the many meetings. And so I look forward also to seeing you all here next year. So let me take the opportunity of addressing you all with a couple of important topics, which in a sense summarize most of the things that I've heard during these panels this afternoon, which I really appreciated. And these are two important topics which I think are really critical for the future. And you have done a wonderful job in remarking them. And I must say that these are two topics that have been exacerbated by the current pandemic. And the first one is, of course, the digital transformation, which is the essence of these broad panel discussions that we have had this afternoon. And the second one, which is strictly interconnected, it's about the sustainability challenges that we are facing in these days. Let me say two things, though, before stressing the importance of these things for the sector of education and in general for the world. The fact that these two important drivers were already there before 2020, in the sense that, as we all know, and it has been very much clearly addressed this afternoon, digital transformation is about the fourth industrial revolution. So it's a source of force which has been there for at least 20 years. And however, it has been there with a sort of strength which only in these years we are really seeing and figuring out in the right dimension. I like to call the fourth industrial revolution, if you allow me, the second industrial revolution, because as people that have a background in economic history know that the most important revolution was the electricity revolution, the second one, which really created the world from the economic viewpoint as we know it today, with specific sectors, with big multinationals, with big entrepreneurial efforts all around the world, and with the globalization that we have lived in the last few years. And this fourth revolution, de facto, is the second fundamental revolution for human history, because it's really redefining all the sectors and the globalization as we have seen it so far. We are seeing how the disruption forces of the digital transformation have taken place at the very beginning, only in the retail activities, in the publishing industry, and only in recent years we are realizing how all industry, every single industry, has been dramatically impacted by the digital transformation. Now, the pandemic has, if you wish, reinforced even more the importance of digital transformation. I like to say to my students that, for example, in Italy, we have been forced to move at the end of February from in-presence education to digital education, and without the digital transformation, of course, we could have not done that. And similarly, for most of the companies and corporations and institutions, without smart working, we couldn't have done that. So first, digital transformation clearly is impacting dramatically society, and it's something for which we have to really dig into a series of problems. The second fundamental driver, which was again already there before the pandemic, is all these sustainability challenges, which range from the importance and immersion of green technologies till the crucial topic that was addressed today in several discussions about inclusion, for example, about diversity, about in general, the great divide which is occurring in most of the countries, and let me also add, between countries. So these sustainability challenges were already there. And I like to point out, being a professor at the university, how the Z generation, the generation that was born after 1997, was so active in remarking these things. And Greta Thunberg, probably with the big protest of the Fridays for Future, has been the one before the pandemic who stressed the importance of this trend that the world should have taken. And again, if you allow me, the pandemic also remarked the importance of these things, because what we are seeing in these days in many countries, what we are seeing in these days in many different, of course, regions between the countries, is really the impact in terms of inclusion that sustainability challenges are, of course, bringing. These digital transformation and sustainability challenges are clearly intertwined. And I like a lot all the discussion about well-being, about the complexity, for example, of doing smart working and doing online education in small homes, in a situation with families for which, for example, you don't have the fortune to have a great connection like we are having all this afternoon. All these things are really crucial for the future. And I believe that the very good news is that there is a major focus also of political forces. So I praise this task force this afternoon, and more broadly, what has been going on in the current Saudi T20 activity. So the fact that these are things that clearly we move forward for the next year. And just to give you an exemplification, I'm sure that most of you are also familiar with what is going on, not only in Italy, but more broadly in Europe. And, you know, the European Union budgeting processes for the 2021 and 2027 has really put these fundamental elements at the center of the attention, not to mention the recovery fund, which has been called for the reasons that I mentioned before, the importance of sustainability and digital transformation has been called the Next Generation EU Fund. And so this clearly means that the political attention is there for helping the world evolve with this new structure that the digital technology will provide to all the sector, is there to face and to cope with these fundamental challenges that the sustainability is bringing to us, and is there also to debate, for example, speaking about sustainability, an important topic in business schools. You know, one of the fundamental discussion and debate in these days is to really emphasize the importance of purpose for corporations. Up until you know, a few years ago, business schools were famous to in general profess a sort of orientation to profit, but more and more it is clear that big corporations, big multinational, in general, all institutions should pay attention not simply to profit, but more broadly to their stakeholders, to their customers, to their employees, to the broader environment and ecosystem in which they are included. These sustainability challenges will be crucial really to let the future evolve. And the very positive angle, I would say, is that this is all about you know, human capital. And so I think that that's really what will make us stronger in the future, and will probably also give us the opportunity to lead the evolution of the species towards a better society, is really to educate the people, to educate young kids, young students, to educate more senior students at universities, and to provide also something which was remarked this afternoon, so the lifelong learning, so opportunities for everyone to continue learn during their lifetime. And again, in this, there is still a long road to walk, because again, because of the difficulties with which sometimes people that are unemployed, or people that you know, are living a situation in a specific sector for which their competencies and their skills are not become less important, and have to be in a sense renowned, is something that we should of course care for. So again, I hope to have summarized some of the most important topics that I heard today, which are again crucial for the country in which Bocconi University is included, Italy, but I believe they are really crucial for Europe in general and for the world, and that's the reason why I'm sure that the forthcoming T20 will embrace them and will bring them to a different light, possibly in 2021 with some vaccine and with the end of the pandemic. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you and to discuss these topics.
Thank you so much, Gianmario. We're at your disposal. Anything that you need from us moving forward, we're happy to make this transition as smooth as possible and as impactful as possible for everyone. So we really appreciate your enthusiasm and your grasping of all of these issues and summarizing them back for us. We do appreciate you being with us here today, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you so much for your time today. Having said that, I think last but definitely not least, I'm very proud to introduce our fearless leader, Dr. Fahad Al-Turki, who is the chair of the T20 Saudi Arabia. I personally would like, since we're sitting here, to give you a personal thank you and a lot of gratitude for supporting all of the task forces, giving us our leeway to be able to do our jobs and to be able to produce and to being there night and day, no matter what happened all throughout this crisis. So we appreciate your leadership and your support. And having said that, I'll hand it over to you for closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi. It's been a pleasure actually listening to the webinar today, and very interesting and lively discussion that we had throughout the day. And more importantly, the recommendations that we have came up with. While we celebrate the final stages of the T20 and this summit season, which is slightly different than what it used to be done in previous T20s, given COVID-19, we also realize the greater responsibilities on the T20. I have worked with T20 in previous years. I have worked in a close relationship with a number of policymakers here in the kingdom and also abroad during my time at the IMF. I have never seen an appetite to accept policy recommendations and to search for fact-based research policy recommendations like this time around. And the reason for this is the great level of uncertainty that we're living in. I was in a meeting with the Sherpas of the G20 last week, and there is need for policy recommendations. And we shared some of the policy that was developed under this task force. And I'm thankful to all the authors and the contributors, the task force members who worked day and night to provide this throughout this COVID-19 pandemic, to provide policy recommendations within the priorities of this task force. I remember when we started last year, it was a huge task to undertake. And we started with 5 main themes for the Saudi T20. Women and youth, climate and environment, multilateralism, economic development and finance, sustainable resources, as well as technology and digitalization. These were the 5 themes that we started with. Come March, when we started realizing that the pandemic will be a major issue for the global society as well as for the global economy, we were debating whether this is an overarching theme new to the T20 or we should dedicate a task force. We didn't save any effort to make it both. So it was an overarching, and we introduced an 11th task force, multidisciplinary approach to complex problems to address specifically the COVID-19. But we realize, and I've seen the policy briefs and policy recommendations that was produced by this task force addressing the issue of COVID-19. I'm happy to see the numbers of policy briefs. We have 12 policy briefs in this task force with participation from more than 150 authors and researchers, and more than 60 institutions participated. By far, T20 this year, I think, is tackling an important issue. And our inspiration, which we are now drafting in our communique, is to reduce inequality in the face of the health crisis by maintaining access to education and economic opportunities. We also, another inspiration that related to this task force is to leverage technology and digitalization for global challenges, while definitely maintaining their adverse impact or mitigating their adverse impact. But the fact in the ground, as we saw during the pandemic and mentioned also in the discussion today, that the penetration of a critical global mass is required to use technology and digital services to address global challenges. I think there are some of the recommendations that are put forward under this task force that takes us one step closer to our inspiration and addresses some of our challenges, which includes a global effort definitely is needed to address the digital and financial literacy for all citizens of the world. We also call in our T20 official statement for the initiation of a G20 digital money and finance working group. We also need to develop a capacity for cyber diplomacy, cyber security, and artificial intelligence for state and also non-state actors. And last but not least, to ensure rights of digital citizens, including online autonomy, protection from data trafficking, extremism, and ensure child safety on online services. These are some grasp of the recommendations that we put forward, which is detailed in many of our statements in the T20, which definitely came bottom up. So most of the statements that T20 Saudi Arabia have issued are initiated from the task forces. I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the T20 Secretariat to thank every one of you who participated on this panel. A special thank to our lead co-chair, Dr. Heidi, who spared no effort to take this task force forward, as well as our coordinator on working hard to make sure that we are all connected to make sure the effort is moving forward. A special thanks to our co-chairs in this task force for coordinating the lead author's contribution. So thank you very much for your effort and dedication during these difficult times. I would like to also thank the authors as well as the members of this task force. And I would also extend a special thank to the co-host, FGV, for their working with us on making this webinar happen as smooth as it took place. Bocconi University for the concluding remark. Gian Mario, thank you very much for participating and giving us a glimpse of the continuity effort that we both in Saudi Arabia T20, Italy T20, and the broader T20 community would like to see as we move from one presidency to another. I look forward to working closely with the Italian presidency on this, with Bocconi University, as well as other leading institutions in Italy. Definitely SP will be part of that. And last but not least, I would like to thank our co-leading institutions here in the kingdom, CAPSARC and KF CRES, for their organizational as well as financial support for the T20. We have met many challenges with this transition from in-person meetings to virtual meetings. And I'm happy to say that the two institutions spared no time and no effort and no financial resources to support the T20 community around the globe to make this a success. Thank you very much for attending. And I would like to remind our panelists as well as the participants that we are still in the middle of the summit season of T20 Saudi Arabia. So we are now Task Force 5, but we will have Task Force 6, or the opposite, Task Force 7 next week not next week, sorry, on Thursday. So 2 days from today, on the future of multilateralism. So I invite you all to attend the session, and we will close or conclude the summit season with our two-day flagship event on November 31st, on October 31st, and November 1st, inshallah. So I look forward to your participation on both events. And thank you very much again, and have a great day.